Good afternoon, everyone. Testing 1, 2, 3. Let me know when you're good to go. 1, 2, 3. David Crisafulli here in Toowoomba. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, I'm back in Toowoomba for the second time in just over a week, and I want the community to know that we are listening to their concerns. We are hearing how bad things have got, and we understand what has happened in this beautiful region as a result of the Youth Justice Act being watered down nearly 8 years ago. On the back of it, we have a generation of young Crims who know that their rights outweigh the rights of the victim, and it is tearing this community apart. It's tearing Queensland apart. Overnight here, again, another night of madness. Young kids, teenagers, carrying knives, people allegedly stabbed, people surrounded in their vehicle, locked up, screaming for help. First thing I did is I walked through and I met someone by the name of Blue Dog, and the first thing he told me was he had them in his backyard last night. For goodness sake, this is Toowoomba, a diverse, beautiful community, a proud community that is being ripped apart. And my message to every single person here and across Queensland is we are not going to give up on driving the change that is needed. And it is change at both ends of the youth justice spectrum. We need to be serious about early intervention and giving kids the opportunity to turn their life around. And we also have an issue in the here and now where we have to ensure that there are consequences for bad behaviour, because this can't continue. And my plea to the government, once more, and we are running out of time on this, release the legislation today, your proposed changes, and allow Queenslanders to have a say. The clock is ticking. We have reached the 11th hour. And despite all that is happening, despite the lives that are being torn apart, the government won't have the decency to be able to put their changes up for scrutiny. Surely victims of crime deserve that. Surely people who work in the youth justice space deserve to have a say. Surely Queenslanders who want a safer community, their opinion should matter. This is the last chance. We are at 2 minutes to midnight. If you back the changes, release them, let us all work together to fix the Youth Justice Act that was watered down and broken in 2015. We have a broken generation, and there needs to be change at both ends of the spectrum. The Deputy Leader has joined us today, and I'd love Jarrod to say a few words before introducing John.
Well, thank you, David, and good morning. Jarrod Bleijie, Deputy Leader of the Opposition. Obviously joined with the Leader of the Opposition and our fantastic, hard-working local members, Trevor and David Janetzki, and John, local spa business owner here in Toowoomba. And I want to thank John for allowing us to be in his small business today, because he has seen the heart of the crime issues in this region. And I also want to thank both David Janetzki and Trevor our members in these area, because they were at the crime forum the other night and they're giving the feedback to David and I and all our team about the issues faced in Toowoomba and the crime issues that we're seeing not only in Toowoomba but all across Queensland at the moment. The lack of action from the Premier. The fact the Premier couldn't even bring herself to travel to Toowoomba and talk to the hundreds of people the other night at the crime forum. But this is not the first time the Premier has let down Toowoomba. It is a year ago that the Premier paid an official visit to Toowoomba, where she opened the Wellcamp quarantine facility at a cost to Queensland taxpayers of over $220 million. The government are about to hand the lease back. It was a facility barely used, not used to solve the issues of homelessness in the Toowoomba region, putting a roof over someone's head with a housing crisis. No, it has not been used. The government said they were coming up with some fantastic ideas to use the Wellcamp facility for. And what is it? What have they come up with? Nothing. We've heard absolute crickets from the state government. They're about to hand the lease back, and it is a facility that cost Queenslanders over $220 million. And it has been a white elephant sitting there in this community, which could have been used to assist the current housing crisis we've got. I also want to point out that today, as we speak, the Premier is making an announcement with the Prime Minister with respect to Olympic infrastructure. Let me make it abundantly clear. The Liberal National Party were first in to support the Olympics for all of Queensland. We see huge opportunity. Getting infrastructure in Queensland that should have been delivered years ago, that the state Labor government have failed to deliver for the people of Queensland. So I make that point first. But I also make this point. We read today, and just being announced, the Premier's announcing that the Gabba redevelopment is $2.7 billion. $2.7 billion. When she announced the Gabba redevelopment, the Premier said it was going to cost $1 billion. What sort of Labournomics do we have here? When an announcement, and we're talking billions of dollars, when the Premier announces $1 billion, you would think they would have done some homework behind it rather than a few scratches on the back of an envelope. They announced $1 billion redevelopment for the Gabba, and we're seeing now that $1 billion has tripled to nearly $3 billion for one project in the Olympics. One project, nearly $3 billion. That is nearly a 300% blowout from its original budget. On the back of an envelope. What's changed? So my question to the Premier is, what has changed since the $1 billion announcement, where we were told it was $1 billion for an additional 8,000 seats at the Gabba, to now nearly $3 billion for the same 8,000 seats? What has changed? And why is the Prime Minister and the federal government not investing in the Gabba? Do they not see bang for dollar? Do they not see good investment in the Gabba at nearly $3 billion? Well, I put it to you this way. I suspect the Prime Minister, the Labor Prime Minister, doesn't trust the Labor Premier to be able to deliver the infrastructure, because the Labor Party in Queensland have a history of blowouts. Cross River Rail now is nearly at $8 billion. Billions of dollars budget blowout under Mark Bailey. We've seen the Cooma Connector, the Gold Coast Light Rail, $500 million blowout on each project. The Labor Party in Queensland, the Labor government, has a history of budget blowouts. So is it any wonder that we've seen the Gabba redevelopment blow out from $1 billion to nearly $3 billion before any planning has taken place? Seriously, this would be the biggest blowout we've seen before any planning has taken place. Well, the government should have planned and evaluated this project. I'm going to hand over to John now, who owns Spa. And John, I want to thank you for having us in your beautiful part of the world and for the story you're going to tell, because you're on the front line in this shop. You see it and you talk to your customers every day about the real impact the crime in Toowoomba is having on your customers. So, John, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Just wanted to bring a couple of things to attention. I've been in this supermarket now for 22 years, and I've had 40 years in retail in Toowoomba. I've been a long, long time since I've seen things quite as bad as they are. Just the other day, I had a mother taking a kid out of a baby seat and a couple of little ones out behind a car just out the side of the shop here. I happened to walk out the back door just as these two teenage kids were running at her with their jeans and shirt wrapped around their head, and they diverted and took off. I don't know if they're going to steal a bag or whatever happened, but that lady asked me to walk her out to a car just so she could get out there with the kids. I had a senior lady in here not so long ago, lives a few blocks from the store. She bought 4 little bags of groceries. She's well in her 70s. She took a car home to a house, went out, got 2 bags out of a boot, went back to get the next 2 bags, and a car's missing. It's driven down the street. The groundskeeper here, just the other night, we're having some work done at the back of the shop. We had bollards out there. Sure enough, the next morning they're gone, they're broken, they're vandalised, and they've got them on camera walking through the doors here at 4 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning. I can just go on and on. There's just so many things that are happening in Toowoomba, and I don't think the police have got a chance of getting on top of it. They do an extremely good job. They're extremely good to us, but they just can't keep up with the amount of crime that's happening, whether it's kids over at the school across the road there, busting things. Overnight, there's a gentleman lives down the road. He's got his car parked just down the road here in South Street. He come out the next morning. There is crowbars through the door. The mirrors are knocked off. There's rocks on the bonnet, and it's just kids. We've got photos of kids on the bonnet of cars doing gang symbols, smiling that they stole it, and it seems to be that they can publish their faces and put it online, and it doesn't seem to happen.
What's going on here? Come on.
Yeah. But that's basically the gist of what's going on. and I don't know how else to say it or how else to put it, but it's costing us a lot of money.
Did you get along to the forum at all last night?
No, I was actually here. My ceiling lights are blowing out. We had a big blackout, and I did a 30-hour shift, so I never got to go.
Have you seen much of the commentary around it? Seeing what was said at the forum, and do you have an opinion on how it went?
The comments that my customers have been giving me is the fact that they thought it was a waste of time. That's what they got. You know, no one that they wanted to turn up turned up, and they just saw it as a big waste of time. Because I think their confidence is gone. I don't think they have any confidence now that the job's going to get done and things are going to get fixed.
I understand you've had quite a few windows smashed recently.
Yeah, it was 18 months ago. Yeah, they broke in. They did rob 5 shops, 5 supermarkets and petrol stations in Toowoomba. We actually caught them because I was fortunate enough to have them breaking through my door and see it on the camera and let the police know where they were, what they were wearing and where it was happening. And they caught them. But they did 5 stores, smashed through the window, smashed up all my cigarette cabinets, stole tens of thousands of dollars worth of stock, smashed my checkouts up. And the only thing that I got back from that, apart from the repairs to my building, was that the young girl that was in the car, she got let off because she didn't know what was happening. She was just in the stolen car driving around 3 o'clock in the morning. She didn't know what was happening. And the other young fella that was in there was put down on curfew from 7 till 7. Well, we were on lockdown then. We're all on 7 till 7. So I don't understand what his punishment was. I had a lady that comes in here quite regularly. She's been banned from the store. She's not allowed in the store. We tell her not to come in the store, and she just comes in, steals what she likes, and walks out the front door and just wanders off. Because if she does get caught, it's half an hour of inconvenience for her. And we're basically her pantry, just comes and goes as she feels like. And we're all getting a bit sick of it.
So should juveniles be facing tougher consequences, John?
Yeah, they should be. I think if you can sort of, you get a gauge of people. Everyone's got a basic knowledge of what's right and wrong. You know if you're doing the right thing. You know if you're doing the wrong thing. And I think if you know it's wrong, you should face the penalties of what they are. It's pretty simple. Like, I keep going back to my childhood, and I would never have done that. Never. Wouldn't have even thought about it. No worries.
You stand right. I'll say a few things. Thank you, David Janetzki, member for Toowoomba South. And I brought the leader and deputy leader here today for just the reason that John has articulated, was that this is the heartbeat of the city. And this shopping centre was actually the first shopping complex that we had in Toowoomba. And John's a local legend, and he talks to more people than anyone else I know. So his assessment and what he's hearing from the community about the crime forum on Wednesday night says everything. Because the traumatic stories that we heard that night, the frustration, the fear, the despair, the ministers were here to hear it, but the one person who should have been here wasn't, and that was the Premier. We can't go on like this with our community living with baseball bats under their beds, people sleeping while their partner keeps watch. We can't keep living like this. And whether it be business crime here, windows blown out, met Blue Dog on the way in today. He lives up the road, cares for his sister. Offenders were in his backyard last night. So my message is clear, is that we cannot go on living like this. And that's why next week when we get to Parliament, we'll be pushing hard. We should have the laws already, and Anastasia Palaszczuk should have been here the other night, and she continues to let the people of Toowoomba and Queensland down. Trevor.
Thank you, and look, thanks very much for Dave Crisafulli and the Deputy Leader to coming to town. My community is very angry and very scared, and they have told me that they think it is completely arrogant of the Premier to not come to the crime forum and not come to Toowoomba. And if she doesn't come to Toowoomba, then she proves them right. She will show that she is arrogant and doesn't care about the people of Queensland. So I call on her to stand up and show some leadership, turn up in this town, listen to people. We have allegedly had people attacked and killed in our street. We've had gunshots this week and someone stabbed last night. If this is not the reason for the Premier to visit, then she proves my community right in calling her arrogant. She should come to Toowoomba.
Thanks very much. Thank you all.
In your eyes, what did Wednesday's Youth Crime Forum actually achieve?
it was further proof that the government stopped listening. And for the Premier not to front up, I think that just says to this community, we just don't want to do anything for you. And I'm sorry if that's a little too brutal, but this region is in the grips of something the likes of which they've never seen before. And the state is suffering through a youth crime epidemic that no one is believing how bad it possibly is. And when the laws were changed, and I'm sorry to go back on that time and time again, but that is the genesis for this. When the laws were watered down in 2015, the first signs were in a magnificent city called Townsville, where it started. But we said at the time that that would spread, and spread it has, like wildfire throughout the community. And there is nowhere I go at the moment where people don't pull me up and say, keep going on driving change for youth crime. And I'm talking about Cairns. I was in Mackay the other night. I'm talking about north and south sides of Brisbane, Sunny Coast, the Gold Coast. I was with, this morning, talking to someone from Gundawindi, Mount Isa. It is across the state, and it is because there is a generation who have been told there are no consequences for your bad behaviour. And then the next generation look up at that and say, righto, well then we're on our own too. We have created a generation, and it is going to take some time to turn it around. But if we were serious and we embedded consequences for action and we made breach of bail an offence starting from next week, at the very least we'd send a signal that the game's up. There's going to be change. But for the government not to even release that legislation ahead of the sitting, for Queenslanders not to be able to have a say, tells me everything I need to know.
Do you know what is on the agenda for next week?
Not a peep. I haven't been told, the Deputy Leader hasn't been told, the Manager of Opposition hasn't been told, but more importantly, Queenslanders haven't been told. Now, there was an unprecedented letter from many dozens of peak groups that deal in the youth justice sector, and they were so frustrated, they put a public letter to the government about how bad youth crime is. The government hasn't taken the time to listen and properly consult with them and show them the legislation. Now, that shows you everything you need to know. Now, I've listened to them, and there are points of view we share and there are points of view we disagree, but they deserve the right to be heard. So too do the family of the victims who I have stood beside, families whose lives have been torn apart. So too do the 150,000 people who signed a petition for change, and the government is treating every single one of them as a political issue rather than a public safety issue. And that's what happens when governments have been there too long.
The Queensland Law Society has been quite critical of the lack of consultation. What do you think about the peak legal body not being consulted about this stuff?
It's the Law Society, it's victims, it's people who work in the youth justice space, it's everyday law-abiding Queenslanders. People like John. And this is day 2 for me standing in a business where the business owner is just at their wit's end. And do you want to know all they want? They just want to be able to come into their business, be able to have a red-hot crack at making a living, go home and be able to ensure their family's safe. They're not asking for anything else from government. They're not asking for cash handouts. They're not asking for anything other than the basic right of safety to be able to run a business and run a family. And so too do the dozen or so people that John employs, so too does Blue Dog from down the road. That's not too much to ask. We've heard a lot about Queenslanders being kept safe. That is really, really important. There are a number of ways that communities need to be kept safe as well, though. And that starts with the ability to be able to go to bed at night and to know that you will wake up in the morning and the vehicle that's parked at the front where you go and earn a living will still be there. That your child who sleeps in the room beside you doesn't have to go to bed the next night crying, wondering if the bad men will come back. Because that's what we heard when we were here just the other day. And people are fed up, and we're fed up. And it seems like the only people who don't believe this is a full-blown crisis are the people who are elected in this state and given the privilege of governing. And one way or another, change is coming. That change is either going to come in the weeks and months ahead, and by the way, let me be really, really clear. The changes that we drive next week in the Parliament, that's not the end of the road. There will be more change, and we'll be fighting for that change every day for the next year and a half and beyond. But if that change doesn't happen the way that Queenslanders expect, you can rest assured that if we're given that privilege at the end of 2024, further change will be coming at both ends of the spectrum. For those repeat kids who have grown up in a broken generation because of a broken system, and the next generation. And we're not going to give up on those either. And I know that there are people who don't share that view, but I believe that young kids at the front end of the journey in youth crime deserve an opportunity to turn their life around. And we are going to give them every crack to do so. At the other end of the spectrum, we're going to stop the revolving door of those hardcore crims running around with knives and taunting police. One way or another, change is coming.
So other than making breach of bail an offence, what action would you be taking to keep Queenslanders safe?
Good question, and we will be putting forward some changes next week. But I just want to give the government one last opportunity to put forward their legislation and allow all of us to work together and listen to experts to be able to drive change. Now, we will be strongly putting forward suggestions. Also, we're not going to be belligerent, and we're not going to play politics and say that because changes come from the government that we won't support and consider. And we've proven that. This is about version 5 or 6 of the number of point plan. And every time we've pointed out where we believe things could be improved, and every time we've pointed out where we think things will fall through the cracks. And I use GPS trackers as an example. We read the legislation, we said it wouldn't work because young kids would be able to choose not to wear one as though it's a fashion accessory. And fast forward nearly 2 years and there's less than 10 that have been fitted. Now, despite that, we said we would back those changes, and all we asked was the government to be as mature as we were and to back breach of bail. And they wouldn't even let us put it up for debate. Now, here we go again. We will do everything we can to back sensible suggestions. We will continue to look at things that come forward into the future. But wouldn't it be great if we could change the Youth Justice Act and go back to consequences for action, ensure that breach of bail is an offence, and finally put the rights of the victim ahead of the rights of the young offender. Thanks very much for having us, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers, John.
Cheers.